Hang on.
So, for those who don't know, when we first started doing this program, this is the man that we knew we had to get in front of the camera. He is
the font of all knowledge.
Indeed.
Hardly.
And humble while he's at it, too.
I was going to say, you guys are scraping the bottom of the bucket for the font of all knowledge.
Alright, so the way we begin these is just you introduce yourself, name, rate, you know, how long you were in the service, and then start telling us about it.
So, my name's David Canfield. I'm a retired Engineman Chief Petty Officer. I hold the Surface Warfare Combatant Craft qualification and Enlisted Surface Warfare qualification. And I did 22 years in the Navy, roughly. 21 years and 11 months. And I retired in 2008 from the reserve. About a third of my career was on active duty, about 2/3 in the reserve. And my first assignment was aboard Battleship Iowa. So as a young 17-year-old kid.
What year was that?
1987.
87. It was the assignment I'd hoped for if I were able to enlist.
You know, it's funny because I wanted a battleship. I was born and raised in California. My dad was in the service. All of my siblings were going into the service. I was kind of a history buff. I wanted a battleship. So you go through boot camp, you get a thing called a dream sheet. It's where the Navy uses to tell you where they're not going to assign you. And so on my dream sheet, I wrote down Long Beach, because I knew there were 3 battleships there. Mm-hmm. San Diego, Treasure Island. And for the class of ship, I put Battleship. So I get my orders. USS Iowa, BB-61. I'm like, yes! I flip the page. I'm like, oh dear God, it's in Norfolk. There's been some horrible mistakes. So, yeah, well, yeah.
And, well, first of all, Danny, you want to make sure that his name is visible?
Yeah.
And then your odyssey or your adventures finding the ship were rather fun, weren't they?
Oh, so I got my orders, and so I thought, okay, I'll go to Norfolk. So I flew to Norfolk, and the ship was not there. They said, no problem, ship is deployed. We'll send you to Rota, Spain, and you'll meet it in Rota. So on my birthday, November 8th, 1987, at the right young age of 18, I arrived in Rota, Spain, and I walked down to the pier, and there was nothing but water there. And so I thought, well, I'm 18 years old. I'm in a foreign country. I don't speak the language. I'm completely broke. And apparently I'm UA, so I'm probably in trouble. So, you know.
Welcome to the Navy.
Exactly. So ultimately, some crusty old chief took me under his arm, and about 3 or 4 days later, we found the ship in Marseille, France. After about a 4-hour ride in a stake truck amongst all of the mail bags down the freeways in France, we finally made it to the ship. So.
And what were some of the things that you did on board?
You know, when I was on board, I had the sexy job of making fresh water. So that's what I did most of my time on board. I made fresh water from salt water using a distilling plant. And we didn't distill anything clever, just water and occasionally fuel, but that's another story. I spent upwards of 16 hours a day running the distilling plant or doing maintenance on it or whatnot. Ultimately, I ended up working in the small diesel engine repair shop on board. And so I was able to run a lot of the Liberty launches and the captain's gig. I was the backup, what they call snipe. Snipe's a pejorative for an engineer. I was a backup gig snipe, so I got to run the officer's motor barge. So
nice.
It's actually kind of funny. I was at a memorial a couple of years ago, and Father Danner was there. He's our Catholic chaplain. Neat guy, really, really neat guy. Full bird captain by the time I ran into him again. And so I walk up to him after the ceremony, and I shake his hand, and he's looking at me like, "Do I know you?" And I'm like, "Oh, don't worry about it, Father. I was never, I'm not Catholic. I was never in Mass." And he's like, "Why do I know you guys?" But I was running the officer's motor barge in St. Thomas, and his eyes got kind of big, and he got this sheepish grin, and he's like, "Me and the chief engineer," and I'm like, "Yes, sir," and he just shakes my hand. Thank you so much. He was he had a great time on Liberty in St. Thomas.
Oh boy. Oh boy.
And his secrets will die with you.
Oh, absolutely. All I know is that I had to put him in a flotation device and sort of secure him to the rail so that he would stay on the boat on the way back. Worked out.
So, we know you as kind of the master storyteller. You have all the stories in the land, some of which you can't tell us, some of which you can tell us but not on camera, but some of which you are willing to tell us on camera. So... We've made a list.
You have cues. So if you're anything like my kids, they have all the stories memorized. I have all my Dad See stories memorized. So, you know the right buttons to push, you get the right story back out.
So obviously the stereotype when you're in the Navy, the general quarters alarm sounds and everyone runs. I've heard for the most part that wasn't your experience though.
So about half the time when I was on board here, we were engaged 1987-88. There was an operation called Operation Earnest Will. And Earnest Will was where we escorted Kuwaiti or U.S. flagged Kuwaiti oil tankers because the Iranians were busy mining the Gulf, and we felt like if we put a U.S. flag on a Kuwaiti ship and they ran over a mine, it would be an act of war and we could go do nasty things. So we spent a lot of time going into the Gulf and then escorting these U.S. flagged Kuwaiti oil tankers back out. We kind of knew it was coming, like days in advance, and so it would be in the plan of the day. We're going to general quarters at 9 o'clock. We're going to transit the Gulf. We're going to pick up, such and such, and it always had an Earnest Will operation number associated with it, and so. Whenever you sound general quarters, you get the alarm, and then they say reason for general quarters, something terrible has happened or whatever. So that morning we got the Seven Dwarfs song over the 1MC, hi ho, it's off to work we go, bong, 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 general quarters, all hands man your battle stations, reason for general quarters, Earnest Will operation number, umpty squat, whatever it was.
Right.
And so you're like, oh, it's time to go to GQ for this, 19-hour evolution where it's... So you swing by the G-Dunk and grab some candy and extra pack of cigarettes and grab some food off the mess decks and something to read and saunter to your GQ station because, So normally when they sound GQ, they start ticking off the amount of time. So it's like time plus 1 minute after it's been sounded. So as the morning rolls on, it's like time plus 10, time plus 12, time plus 15, time plus 20. And finally the XO gets on the 1MC and he's like, all right, guys, let's get this crap cleaned up and get GQ set. So it's like material condition zebra is set throughout the ship at time plus 22 or 21, whatever it was.
Right.
And so we went and did our thing, and it was kind of uneventful. And it's always uneventful for engineering because you do the same thing that you do every day anyway. And if it becomes eventful, it's because something terrible has happened.
Right.
So, you go down, and I was down in Forward Auxiliary making fresh water because that's what we did. So I was running the distilling plant. We get done. The only difference is at GQ, it's buttoned up and it's so hot. I mean, it's just so hot because the ventilation's, restricted and all the hatches are closed, all the doors are closed. So you come out of there and your core temperature is about a bazillion degrees. And we finally secure from the op, and I remember going up and just laying on the deck and berthing in my skivvies, just letting the tile and the steel soak the heat out of your body. And everybody's that way. Red lights on, the ship's at holiday routine, everybody's kind of relaxed.
Right.
And over the 1MC, just as calm as can be, you hear, gentlemen, this is the Tactical Actions Officer speaking. We're currently tracking 2 inbound Iranian F-14s. We'll put the ship back to general quarters at this time. Bong, bong, bong. So that had a completely different motivation to it because the Iranians didn't like us, and their F-14s were the ones that we had given the Shah, and they had lots of nasty weapons that were still very functional on them. So I remember grabbing my trousers and the rest of my uniform and pushing people up the ladder in front of me, screaming at them, move, move, move! And so I finally get down to forward again, because that's where general quarters is, and they're like, material condition zebra is set throughout the ship at time plus 3. So, like, well, there you go. It's all a matter of motivation. You feel like you're going to get killed, you're much, much more motivated. So.
And I remember you telling me that was one of the times where you were very, very scared, but I don't think you can tell us about the other time, at least not on camera.
I can. I mean, there were a couple times on the ship. The most obvious one was the April 19th incident. I was pretty terrified. For those that don't know, on April 19th, 1989, the ship suffered an open breach explosion in the center gun of turret 1, or turret 2 rather. And we killed 47 sailors that day. And is something about being 18 years old with your ship on fire that is a little alarming.
Yeah.
But yeah, I won't go into too many details. That's a topic I have to be ready to talk about.
And that's a topic we'll have another day.
Yeah.
So, for complete mood whiplash, what was the funniest story that you had from being aboard Iowa? Or, for that matter, being in the Navy?
There are several to choose. I always draw a blank when people do that.
What's safe for all audiences?
I often draw a blank when you ask me that as well. There are, safe for all audiences. I know for a fact that my daughter was scrambling to get her Twitch account set up so she could watch the stream, so I have to make sure that I don't tell certain stories.
Including of you going into boot camp?
Oh, so you're thinking about, I know which one you're thinking about.
Yes.
So that one starts actually in Oakland and ends with me arriving in boot camp. So I leave the Oakland Military Entry Processing Center, whatever it is, service station, MAPS, MEPS. And they load us on a bus and we go to the airport. We get on Pacific Southwest Airlines, the Smiling Birds, which are no longer with us. And we fly to San Diego. So I fly to San Diego. And the first thing that happens, we take off from Oakland, and the pilot goes, "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard PSA flight, one whatever it was from Oakland to San Diego. We hope that you enjoy your flight today. For those of you that are reporting to NTC San Diego, this will be the last thing that you enjoy for some time." So we were like, great. So we get off the plane and we walk out, and there's a chief that meets us there, and it's like the recruiters. They're all, "Hey, welcome to San Diego," smiles and shake your hand, and "Oh, this is gonna be great." And so then we go out, and there's this old like Bluebird, bus body international bus, like 100 million years old, and so we get on and we go to the back and you sit down, and it's like one person to a seat, and then it's two persons to a seat. And then it's three to a seat. Then we're standing in the back hanging on, and pretty soon there's just this little Filipino chief, and he's just packing people into the bus. I'm just packing them in like sardines. And he starts chanting, "Not to butt, not to butt, not to butt." And I'm like, okay, great, this is swell. That's as bad as it'll get. So he lines us all the way up down the aisle and down the stairs, so the doors like close in the guy's face. And then he climbs into the driver's seat, and he takes off towards NTC San Diego, which is like a block away. And he starts singing, "I love my Navy and I love my job, doo-dah, doo-dah." And he's rocking the bus. "I got a bus load of new recruits." And they're like, crash, crash, crash. Like, this may not turn out exactly as I had planned. So, I mean, I could continue that whole story. I was asked just recently to speak at the Coast Guard Chiefs Pinning, so I'm putting my speech together for Friday. And I just had lunch with the Master Chief, the Chief of the Mess for Long Beach, the Los Angeles sector for the Coast Guard, and we were swapping lies over lunch. And I was, what am I going to talk about? And he says, "Well, talk about what it meant to be a chief." I'm like, right. So I was raised by a W4, which is a Chief Warrant Officer, and at the time they didn't make W5s. And so I figured I knew everything there was to be in the Navy, and I was raised by a W4, so what the heck. So the next morning, actually it wasn't the next morning, so as we got off the bus, I get off the bus in boot camp in San Diego, and this chief is just lighting into this recruit. He's just tearing him up. And I open my mouth, and out loud in my outside voice, unbidden, come the words, "He can't do that. He's just a chief."
Oh no. God.
He forgot all about that other recruit. I mean, I have his face turned a shade that I've never really seen before. just the chief, God. And it was like, oh dear God, please make him anybody but my company commander, you know. Thankfully, I was not in his company, but I shared that story years later when I retired in my retirement speech, and I said, well, here I am 22 years later, and I am just a chief. So, you know, just a chief.
Just a chief.
So,
Wow.
And there are a couple stories we have listed here of some fun that you had with new recruits, like getting samples of the stack gas.
So, down and forward, actually in any engineering space, if you go on any museum ship or any active duty ship, in all of the engineering spaces, there are racks. And they have a light behind them, and they've got these beautiful square bottles. And you take lube oil samples, and you take them every hour, and they stack up on there so that you can see whether the oil's degrading, whether it's getting darker, or has particulate in it. Mm-hmm. Well, that's like a Navy stock number. They're a standard number of slots that go in there, and sometimes it doesn't match the number of pieces of equipment that you have.
Right.
And so we had 2 extra columns of these bottles that were just empty, and you know, a ship full of bored sailors. And you know, back in the day, we all smoked everywhere, all the time. And so it's just horsing around one day, and I took a big drag, and I blew the cigarette smoke in the bottom, put the cap on it, and watched, and the smoke swirled. And I was like, oh, that's really clever. So I filled all of the bottles in one of the rows with cigarette smoke just to see how long they would go. And you know, a good prank is planned, but some of them are just spontaneous. You get inspired, but all of them age well like wine. You can't rush them. And so I think it might have been Kruger. If Tex, if you were watching this, dudes, seriously, I'm sorry. But I think it was. Anyway, Tom Kruger was one of the guys in the unit, and my memory has him being the guy that we victimized with this, but I might be wrong. But he walks in and just very casually looks at these row of samples of smoke which are swirling around, and he goes, "What is that?" And I was like, "Oh, it's a stack gas sample." Now, stack gas is what comes out of the stacks on the ship, and what's the output from the boilers, right? And there's a smoke watch, because the Navy oils the machinery with the blood of humans, you know. So, and the smoke watch is a human who sits up really high on the ship and looks aft over the stacks, and you can see each stack is divided into 4. So it's the forward 4 boilers and the aft 4 boilers. So you can tell which one's making smoke, because making smoke is bad. And so that's called the smoke watch, and they watch the stack gas to see whether it's smoking. Mm-hmm. So I tell Kruger, it's a stack gas sample. Well, we're on the 7th deck. That's 7 decks below the main deck. The smoke watch is stood on the 011 level, which is 11 stories or floors or above the main deck. So that's 18 stories. That's a lot of ladders. And so he's like, "Oh," and I was like, wait. So I let him go through the whole watch, and I waited till the next day when he came in, and I just handed him a bottle, and I said, "You need to go up to the smoke watch and get a stack gas sample." So up he goes, 18 ladders to get laughed at. Back down 18 ladders to be really hostile. You know? We used to do that. You know, it's amazing. So you know, at the risk of being only slightly risque, I had another, because we used to prank everybody, right? Oh. So I had a buddy of mine, acquaintance buddy, worked for me at one point, named Taylor, Fireman Taylor, and I don't know Taylor's first name, and I haven't been able to find him on Facebook. But Taylor looked like the kid off of Mad Magazine. He did. He looked just like
Alfred
the front of
Newman.
Oh my gosh.
Wow.
And so every night we would get the over the 1MC. You would get, "Now read the ship for red lighting, muster light bulb crew," and it was kind of slurry, and so your brain fills in what you think it needs to hear. Mm-hmm. And so I went to Taylor, and I said, "Dude, you're on the light bulb crew," and he goes, "Light bulb crew? What do I do?" I said, "It's kind of like mess cooking. You just go to the light shop every night when they call it away, and they'll put you to work." And they did. There's an electrician's mate who's involved with the ship now. named Marty. And Marty Palmieri, and he ran a light shop, and he put Taylor to work changing light bulbs. And every night, and I forgot about it. And so every night at 8 o'clock, they would call away, you know, rig the ship for red lighting, master light bulb crew. And off he would go to be on the light bulb crew. And then he came to me and he's like, dude, how long am I on the light bulb crew? And I'm like, oh, light bulb crew. I'm like, sometime yet, I think. And so he did not find out that it was not light bulb crew until he was assigned to the lifeboat crew as an engineer. Wow. Because at night you rig the ship for red lighting and you muster the lifeboat crew. Mm-hmm. And he got assigned and he says, what am I supposed to do? And they said, dude, where have you been? At 8 o'clock every night they muster the lifeboat crew. You just go up to the muster by the lifeboat and that's all you've got to do. Oh, he was angry. I have a chipped tooth that is a result of that prank because he came into berthing and caught me from behind. I went face down on one of those void covers.
Wow.
Yeah, it was. He was genuinely angry. But if I've got time, speaking of knowing other people's sea stories, I got to tell him credit where credit is due. This is my brother's sea story. Okay. Like any good sailor, you can tell him like your own, but he might actually watch this, so I gotta give him credit. So my brother was on an Aegis cruiser, mm-hmm. Some of which are still. I think we still have Aegis cruisers. Yeah. Not very many. But unlike the Battleship, the Aegis cruiser is like really, really automated. And so Damage Control Central and Main Engineering Control are in the same room with all of the computer screens and all of the sound-powered phone networks on the ship terminate in Main Control. So if something happens in Main Control, everybody on the ship knows about it immediately. And all of the engineering people stand watch in Main Control. So the engineering officer, the watch, the EO, all of those people. So my brother's work, he's an IC, interior communications tech. He's in the IC shop.
Right.
Right across from the IC shop is the aft head. They have a brand new fireman, new guy out of boot camp. Okay. So he goes into the head, and Robert looks at his other IC too, and he's like, "Hey, Goose, come here." And he's like, "Dude, I'm not going to go in the head with you. What's wrong with you?" He's like, "No, come here." So they go in, and Fireman Parker has sat in one of the booths, mm-hmm. And so they stand. And so Goose is looking at Robert like, "What?" And so he turns to him and he says, "Petty Officer Gossman, when we secure from sea and anchor detail, I want you to have Fireman Parker take the big wrench and go to Main Control to tighten the nuts on the MPA." And he goes, "Oh, roger that, no problem." So then they leave. Now, Parker has overheard this conversation, but he does not realize that it is staged. So they secure from sea and anchor detail. They've been up all night. Goose gets the biggest wrench he can find. It's like a 14-inch crescent wrench, hands it to Parker and says, "Go to Main Control and tighten the nuts on the MPA." So off Parker goes. Robert picks up the phone, calls the engineering officer of the watch, says, "Sir, Fireman Parker is on his way to Main Control to tighten the nuts on the MPA." He goes, "Oh, roger that. We'll take care of him." So, for those of you that don't know, the MPA is the main propulsion assistant. It is the assistant chief engineer. And so he has a console or a desk in Main Control. And so Fireman Parker goes in with this 14-inch wrench, and he goes up to the EL, the engineering officer of the watch, who is in like the Captain Kirk chair in the middle. And the kid's like 17 years old, and he's scared of everything in khaki. I know I was at that age, you know. So he's up there and he's like, "Sir, I'm here to tighten the nuts on the MPA." And so the EO points at the MPA's desk and goes, "You need to go talk to that man over there." Well, the MPA's a warrant. Warrants are terrifying. I mean, warrants are like officers and chiefs combined. They're just the most terrifying thing in the world. I know. I was raised by one. So he goes over to the warrant and he's like, "Sir, I'm here to tighten the nuts on the MPA." And the MPA looks at him and goes, "Son, you're going to need a much bigger wrench." and they send him all over the ship. And they finally, he lugs this like huge 3-foot like spanner wrench out of MEO1, lugs it all the way back up, and goes to the MPA. He's like, "Sir, is this wrench big enough?" At which point, and of course, everybody is cracking up, and everybody on the ship knows what's going on because all of the phone networks terminate right there.
Right.
So the whole ship's getting a blow-by-blow on this. And finally, the warrant took pity on him. He's like, "Son, do you know what the MPA is?" He's like, "No, sir, I don't." And he just took his hat off and turned it around. It says Main Propulsion Assistant on the back of his hat. It's like, well, there you go.
Nice. So you obviously had a super high level of creativity in propagating pranks. Did anybody get you?
You know, they tried. as I said, I was raised by warrant, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the one that they got a bunch of people on that they really tried. That's the one that I remember. And after I didn't let them prank me on it, they kind of gave up. But when I was on here, we had machinist mate second class, and we were retubing one of the heat exchangers down in forward auxiliary. And so these heat exchangers, water around the tubes, fluid inside the tubes. It's like a big radiator. And sometimes they get corroded, and you take the end cap off, and you have to cut them and reflare. It's an ordeal, right? And there's all kinds of different tubes. There's downcomer tubes. There's generating tubes. There's cooling tubes. There's all these. There's main drain tubes, and so it's like, go get me this kind of tube. Go get me that kind of tube, and you're constantly running trying to get the right stuff to retube this. And so he turns to me and he goes, "I want you to go up to the machine shop and get me a fallopian tube." Now, it's 1987, 88, 89. We didn't have women on the ship.
Right.
And again, meaning no disparity, but, I just remember looking at him going, dude, if I find one of those on the ship, I'm not bringing it to you. No. But, so that was the only big prank. But, we used to send people looking for relative bearing grease. We'd send them looking for radar contacts. Ask him for a bucket of steam. We had my dad told me he used to send some kid looking for a bucket of steam when he was a young sailor, and he came back with a bucket of water and a book of matches.
That's
That's
smart.
clever, though.
That's
legit,
smart.
right?
That's smart. Yeah.
So we used to do all kinds of stuff. I sent a kid up to the captain's gig for the captain's import cabin for the keys to the captain's gig. And it's a military vehicle. There are no keys. It's push button start. Right? And so it's like 9:30 at night, and I'm thinking that the Marine at the door will turn him away. No offense to my Marine friends, but no, that was a stretch. And so he goes up and says, "I need to get the keys to the captain's gig." And so the Marine goes, "No problem," opens the door and lets him in. And so I heard about that later from the captain. So yeah.
So that actually leads me into a couple more stories, but they're about your naval career after you left the Iowa. So we want to lead into that.
So when I left the Iowa, I went from the largest, most heavily armed warship in the Navy's inventory to a little piece of what we affectionately called combat Tupperware. So I was on a 33-foot riverine patrol boat, or PBR. It was made out of fiberglass. It had twin 50s forward and 150 aft and a lot of speed. Speed was your primary defensive weapon, like get out. So I spent the next 11 years in the special warfare community, walking on dirt and or little green boats as it was, and carrying a gun. Something that caused my father an unending amount of grief. I remember bringing him down to the unit, and he's like, "Son, the whole reason you joined the Navy is so you have a warm, dry place to sleep every night, and look at you."
Yeah.
But I know the story you're after. You're after the Mauna Kea story. So
yeah.
So we had the USS Mauna Kea, or the Mauna Tuna as she was sometimes called. But the Mauna Kea was a ammunition ship that would come into Mare Island from time to time, and that's where the boat unit was. And so they had a new skipper on board, and so they wanted to test their shipboard security protocols. And so what they really wanted was they wanted us to get all the little green boats underway and attack them so that they could play with their 50 calibers and blanks and stuff. But that is not what they asked. What they asked was, could we test their security? And so we said, oh, sure, no problem. So I was in the reserve at that point. I used to drive this 1979 Pace Aero RV down. It was like a big rolling barracks. We'd all hang out in there and watch movies and smoke. Cigarettes, but smoke. But there'd be like 20 guys in there, and the two roof vents would be open, and it looked like it was on fire. But so in that RV was my brother's Domino's Pizza uniform from when he was moonlighting delivering Domino's Pizza, and so we got to thinking about it. And we're like, I know how to do this. So the battle problem was, Country Orange has done this threat, blah blah blah. It's always country something, right?
Right.
So we ordered Domino's off the base, and they came and delivered a pizza, and so we ate the pizza, and then I put the uniform on, and grabbed the pizza box, which immediately should give you, I mean, how many times have you had pizza delivered that's not in a hot bag, right? All I had was the pizza box. So I had the pizza box, and we peeled an orange, and we laid all the pieces in there. And we went down the pier with the pizza box in a little Domino's uniform and walked right up the brow and said, I have a delivery for a captain, you know, whatever his name was. And the quarterdeck's like, oh, yeah, no problem, follow me. So walked me right up to the captain's cabin, and, you know, he's sitting at his port light looking out at all his guys that are along the rail waiting for the little green boats to arrive. And I was like, he opens the door, I'm like, pizza delivery. He goes, I didn't order a pizza. I'm like, oh, yes, sir, you did, actually. And I opened the box, and there was the orange laid out there and scrawled in Sharpie across the top of the box, said, bang, you're dead. He was really angry. He was just really, really upset, and he was mad at me. And I'm like, dude, your people are the ones that let me in here with a bomb, and it's not my fault. He was really upset that we did not attack his ship with little green boats.
You had a couple experiences with testing security as well, didn't you? There was one time where you got a Marine really good in the face.
Marine in the face.
With a paintball.
That's so we were so when I was in a boat unit, we were on one of the schools we went to, speaking of shipboard security, was called Shipboard Security Engagement Training, SSET, and Shipboard Security Engagement Weapons, SSEW. It's basically shipboard SWAT training. And it's done with paintballs, or at least it used to be, and it was done aboard the ex-USS Elk River, which, just on a perfectly tangential aside, if look up the Elk River, because she did some really interesting stuff in her career, but it was a diving vessel, and had a big moon pool in the middle of it, and so there were a couple of us from the boat community, and then there were a bunch of guys that were off of regular ships, and there were a couple Marines, and we were all dumped together in this class. So we all had varying degrees of talent, if you will, or experience. And it was not long before the instructors were like, okay, all of you guys wearing green, you need to be like over here and not mix with the general population. But so they were running some scenarios, and they had like all of the other students against us at one point. And there was a Marine gunnery sergeant. And we had to come down the main deck and then up this ladder onto the O1 level that was outside. And it's just a chore. It's over your head. There's a low overhead. There's no way to do it. You call it slicing pie, where you come back and you're just trying to get the right angle. And we were stuffed up at the bottom of this ladder, and it's like, screw it, somebody has to go up the ladder. Well, this gunny had proned himself out on the deck with his weapon at deck level, so that as your head popped up, he would have taken your head, just a headshot, right? Wow. Which was not a bad position. Except that when I charged the ladder, I went up over my head, and I fired suppressive fire as soon as my weapon cleared the lip. Pow, 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 pow. And so I come up. I heard him before I saw him, and I heard him sort of gag, and then I was like... and I charge up, and here's this Marine laying on the deck with the little face mask with the grill, and there's like 9 paintball shells in the grill of his... And he's spitting paint out. And I was like, oh... That must have sucked a lot.
Thank goodness he had the mask.
Oh yeah, I mean it was just because that's all we were allowed to wear. We were allowed to wear the paintball mask with the little grill and the goggles and a cup. That was the only protective gear you had, and you wanted to be shot between the legs or in the face because everywhere else it hurt. You know? But no, that was a fun school. My forward gunner on my boat got his call sign because you get assigned a call sign like a pilot, and then you earn a call sign and you keep that forever like herpes because you can't get rid of it. No, I don't, by the way, but I have a call sign, but anyway.
Good night, everybody.
Sorry. You can take the boy out of the Navy. You cannot take the Navy out of the
We wouldn't have it any other
way. We won't have it any other way.
So his call sign was Headshot. And everybody thought, oh, you know, that's because you're such a great sniper, big bad special operators. And it's not. It's because when we were in SSET school, he got shot in the head. On every single op, he got shot in the head. Every op. You know, the last op I went up, and we'd like successfully taken control of the ship from hostages, and he was sitting on a bench. And I'm like, Ken, cool, you know, and he just turns around and like the whole left side of his face is covered in paint. I'm like, oh, never mind. So yeah, that was his
so,
call sign
so
forever.
close.
Yeah, right?
So close. Okay. And speaking of which, there are a couple other ones. I have one here. Apparently, Danny heard about this OBA wake up.
Gary told me to ask you about that one.
Oh my
boy.
gosh. Okay, so
Oh boy.
the OBA is an oxygen breathing apparatus, and it's they don't use them in the Navy anymore. They use regular SCBA or scuba stuff like the firefighters use. But we had on here these oxygen candles, which are like little tiny bombs that you would strap to your chest and breathe with. They gave you 60 minutes of oxygen, so you set the timer for 30 minutes. So you get 30 minutes in and 30 minutes out when the timer goes. Mm-hmm. And it's this big sort of thing. It's got this massive mask and these two hoses, and a diaphragm, so that when you talk through it, you sound like Darth Vader. It's very distinct.
Which was its only purpose.
Well, so you could communicate, because otherwise, you're breathing whatever.
Right.
So you use these when you go in. We used them when we did the fire in the turret, and and they're designed, you can go through and scuttle this whole thing on OBAs. So that's what an OBA is, oxygen breathing apparatus. So we had this guy who just would not get up for watch, and the Navy's got this rule, or had this rule, or we were told they had this rule that you're not responsible for anything you do for the first 3 minutes after they wake you up. And he would come out of his rack swinging every time. He'd just come out swinging, and you're like, it was such a chore to wake him up, and I just had it. And it was one of those days where, and I was pretty squirrely. I was young, I was scared of my own shadow, so I never did anything really overt. It was always sort of subtle-ish. Well-ish. And so I went in to wake him up, and I was just dreading waking him up, and I'm like, I don't want to wake him up. So I went back out into M Division, and there's an OBA locker there, and I got just the mask. And I put the mask on, and I shut down the fans so that it was all quiet and breathing, and I shut down the red light so it was pitch black. We should have awakened him anyway, because the worst sound you can have on the ship is silence.
Right.
And I grabbed a battle lantern, and I jerked his curtains open, and I shined the battle lantern in his face, and I yelled through the diaphragm, "There's one still alive!" I thought I had killed him. The color just sort of drained from his face. And his eyes are like big moon pie eyes. I thought he was going to go into cardio right there.
Wow.
I tore the mask off. I'm like, dude, seriously, just get up for watch. Yeah. It was
Darth Vader from the planet Vulcan.
Oh man, it was he was well and truly it was like the death mask fear, It was like,
was he better behaved after that?
he was easier to wake up. He was senior to me too, I was a fireman, he was a second class. I was like, but yeah, he was pretty docile coming out of it. He was not swinging when he came out of his rack. So
That's awesome.
So bosun's nuts, I think you already talked about.
Yeah.
Oh, that's the nuts on the MPA.
Yeah, the nuts on the
Yeah,
MPA.
that's my brother's.
Yeah, that's your brother's.
Where credits due.
So any other fun stories you can think of your military service
goodness
before we get into
gracious.
the post-military service?
I could stay here and swap lies all day. Probably better off to move on.
So after you left the Navy, what did you start doing?
So it's a long, twisty, turny trail from Iowa to Iowa, and it starts not exactly where you would think. I got off of active duty in 1989 and went to work for a little company that did electronic probation and parole, so ankle bracelet. I tell stories there too, because I did this hookup on this guy, and it was like he was self-medicating a lot, which is probably why he was on the program. Mm-hmm. And so I went into his house to do his hookup, and there's all this like Vietnam era MacSog V and whatnot. Right. And he looks at me and he goes, "Why is the device so big?" Because it's big. It's a little radio transmitter and battery that we would strap to their ankle. And so me, being the smart ass that I am, did not go, "Oh, it's a radio transmitter and a battery." I said, "Oh, it's like a Running Man collar. It's got a half a pound of C4 in it. If you violate your probation, we blow your foot off." Thinking that any sane person would realize that was not the case. Yeah, I didn't even make it back to the office. It was bad. I almost lost my job over that one. One of those 3-watt bag phones, the big giant, cellular phones, because it's in the late '89, early '90.
Right.
Yeah, it was like melting down. You think your phone melts now with text messages. Have the entire probation department calling you. So anyway, I did electronic probation and parole because the company, it was a private company, and they had the bright idea that since I was military. Uh-oh.
Yeah.
Are we out?
Let me see if I can. Oh, we never plugged back
It's a
in.
power issue.
Oh, okay. Have
So
to
that's...
connect you again.
No. Alright. Excuse me, folks. Technical difficulties.
Alright.
All fun and games over here.
So you were doing the.
So I was doing electronic probation and parole because they had the bright idea that that because I was in the military, somehow I was qualified to carry a gun and go visit civilians and help them through their probation. So I did that for a couple years until I realized that I actually didn't like working with the people who wore ankle bracelets, like on a one-on-one basis, by and large.
Not your social circle.
And, kind of not. And by then I'd met my my lovely bride, and although we were not married, she indicated that perhaps I should get a different job since I had no faith in humanity, and maybe we couldn't get married if I didn't. So we went down that path, and
Yeah.
so anyway, the upshot of all of that was I went into the side of the business that was actually doing the electronics instead of using the electronics, and that was my entree into high tech. And I spent the next number of years in high tech. So I have no idea whether your feed is still live or not, the way that you're scrambling. So
No, just
No.
the camera that was on them.
okay,
This computer
fair
died,
enough.
yeah.
We're still live.
Fair
Yeah.
enough.
We're still.
Yeah, you're going over there. It's just us.
Yeah, I was gonna say it was the that's why the pause and slow down. I'm like, dude, seriously, are we online or
Yeah.
not?
Yeah.
You know, so yeah, I did the next 20 years, 25 years in high tech. So I worked for some little companies like Hewlett Packard and Bank of America, although we don't really admit that one too much. I did 5 years at the bank. I did 6+ at Hewlett Packard. I worked for Sprint United Telecom for 5 years. Did some contracting on some startups. Worked for Sure West Communication for 5 years, and I was working at a little search company out of Mountain View. You may have heard of when this ship decided to come out of mothballs and be a museum. So
Nice.
I got a phone call that said, "Hey, do you want to put your ship together?" And I said, "Oh, sure, I'll volunteer."
Famous last words.
You know what Navy stands for, right?
Never again volunteer yourself.
There you go.
I like to tell that when I select people or when I volunteer people to serve food.
Yep.
For the overnights.
Never again volunteer yourself, or you tell them that they were voluntold.
Personally, I'm a fan of volunteered. So, what's some of the stuff that you do here
So
besides everything?
I have the exalted title of Chief Information Officer, CIO. I'm essentially the number 3 guy at the institution. I have most of the internal organizational departments are under me. So Mike Getcher, our Chief Operating Officer, gets things that are consumed by the public. So he does the cool stuff like museum and curatorial, education programs, public programming, the physical maintenance of the ship. And I do things like volunteer services, HR, administration, security, technology, training. There are 6 departments under me. I named 5.
Education?
Training. Education's under Mike. So training, security, administration, volunteer services, tech, and something else.
Okay.
I'm sure I have tasks waiting that I will need to do.
And I'm sure the people, if they are watching this, are screaming at you. The people in those departments.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah. So it goes.
So,
And we've got some very cool stuff coming up. We've talked with Dave Way a little bit about the third deck expansion, but
oh yeah. So we're doing some neat stuff down there. Do you want me to talk about third deck expansion? So
Yeah.
we're doing a thing called Lost at Sea. It is in partnership with Bob Ballard, and it's about some of the ships that he has discovered. And so there's some vignettes about the Lusitania and the Britannia, and the Hood and Bismarck, which are really big. We also have a little bit of information on the Thresher and Scorpion, which were post-war, and we have a big display on Iron Bottom Sound, and really neat sort of display on underwater archaeology and how it ties back to what the ship does. Not all ships get to stay on the surface. So,
before you click next battle, or sorry, Danny, before you click next battle, you gotta log back in.
Pass it over.
Yeah.
I'm being distracted by that.
Yeah.
I'm just watching him. It's not a bad distraction. Yeah. But so it's a pretty cool environment down there. It knocked out most of the engineering berthing. The first space that you go into on the third deck is the old A Division berthing, which was my berthing. I was really touched that they decided to leave my rack there and use that as the enlisted berthing so that my home didn't get wrecked out.
That's awesome.
But a lot of people's did, and you know, if the time comes that mine needs to go, then it needs to go. The ship has a new mission. The guys from World War II in Korea don't have their racks because they were all torn out and redone in the 80s.
Right.
And so the ship has as much of a mission today as she did during World War II, Korea, or the Cold War. And she is reconfigured as necessary to accomplish the mission, just as she was before now. But we try not to be gratuitous about it. You know,
right.
we're careful about what we do. But we needed the space, so we've got a pretty neat space down there. There's a transition room that you go through that introduces sort of the underwater archaeology. Feels a little bit like you're in a sinking ship. And then there'll be the main display hall. And then there's a hall about underwater exploration and ROVs. And then there's an interactive sort of touch lab that we're going to do. That'll open a little bit later. We're a little bit behind on that just because we're resource constrained. But you'll be able to drive an ROV in there, and you'll be able to look at some of the camera footage and try to shoot your own stuff. Try to drive the ROV when you're looking at the ROV, and then try to drive it when all you have is the camera input, because it's a lot harder. And then we have a theater space. We have a mobile exhibit space. We've opened up the back part of the third deck, so you'll be able to see laundry in the print shop and the brig. And then we have a VR space that we're going in where we're doing some virtual reality experiences. So you'll be able to fly the Hup 2 helicopter off of the deck of the Iowa and either do a mission or just fly around San Pedro with it. And we have a Kingfisher experience that we're bringing out as well. And there's some other sort of arcadey things that go in there, but they're less historically tied to the ship.
Right. Does the Bob Ballard exhibit, I know he was the one who discovered USS Yorktown out of Midway.
So I don't know what we're doing. I don't think we're doing Yorktown, and we're not doing Titanic, because obviously,
I mean, Titanic.
Bob Ballard is the guy that found Titanic,
right?
And he is, but Titanic was not lost during wartime. So I don't know whether we're talking about Yorktown or not, honestly, because I'm not in the actual curatorial design. I'm in all the tech support. So we're doing a lot of streaming video. We've got some touch screens down there. We've got some cool interactives, but the content, I'm like, we're doing Bismarck, and I just don't remember us talking that much about Yorktown.
Okay.
So, in the design meetings. So.
Well, that makes me sad, because Yorktown's what got me into military history in the first place, so...
Strange.
Not saying, just saying.
Right? So...
But, you've made quite... well, obviously, everyone... for better and for worse. And, you can be kind of intimidating when people first meet you.
My daughter says that, too. I'm the nicest guy that you will ever meet. I really am.
What is it that you say? What's the difference again between business and personal?
So that comes from my days wearing greens and walking on dirt. If it's business, I'll let you sleep. If it's personal, I'll wake you up first. You know.
And there's a story with one of those. I don't know if you're willing to repeat that on camera.
With one of those,
your letter opener.
Oh.
You were playing with in your office.
Oh man, you're gonna get like HR complaints. So I have the letter opener is weighted not terribly well, but it throws nicely. And I had a box on the workbench, which is on the other side of my office and happens to be right next to the door. And I was releasing some frustration behind closed doors, mind you, by hurling my letter opener at the box. And one of our tour guide leads, Jim Pobog, opened the door right as I had let go of the letter opener, which sailed past him and stabbed into the box right next to him. And he just looks at me and goes, "I'll come back." He just closes the door and leaves. That wasn't as bad as the one where I wasn't even throwing anything. He walks into my office. He knocks on the door. Knock, knock, knock. I'm like, "It's open." And he opens the door and he goes, "Oh, God, I'm sorry." And he just closes the door and leaves. And I'm like, I don't even know. I looked, all I did was look up at the door. And he's like, "I still think I'm the nicest guy that you will meet. But apparently my daughter says I'm not." She's, again, if she was successful, she's watching the feed. She goes, "No, you're intimidating."
I think your history is a little intimidating.
Yeah.
You really do have all this experience with this ship. And it's like, as a newer guy on the ship here and someone who's working in the education department and doing stuff like that, for me, it's kind of daunting. But it's also a cool thing to be able to learn the experiences you've had here and you've had in the Navy, and that you're back, sort of putting all of those to good work here.
It is. I mean, it is giving back too. This is way different than working in corporate America. You know, I told my kids a long time ago, money's a terrible way to keep score. And if you go to work for a nonprofit, you're definitely living that. So you know, but it is, you know, one of the things we want to do is we want to make sure as an institution that we preserve and present this battleship to future generations, not just as a World War II relic or a Korea era relic, which Korea is known as the Forgotten War, although it certainly has relevancy lately in the news, or even as a Cold War relic, but as a symbol of what this nation has done in the past, what it is capable of doing, and what it will do in the future. It is really, it's humbling to work here because, you know, I tell stories. Like, I was 17, 18, 19 years old on board here. I made water. You know, and then we get some of the World War II vets in here, and I'm like, you know, that's not what I did, right? And it really is humbling. I was working on here, and alongside a USS Liberty survivor, and you can look up the Liberty incident, but he's just one of our volunteers, and you find out, and you're like, oh my gosh. We had a Pueblo survivor on board here who spent time in a Korean prisoner of war camp, and it's like, yeah, I feel candidly really uncomfortable occupying that pedestal with those people. You know, but it's funny. I had this long discussion with Jim Pobog the other day about, you know, heroes and not heroes, and I said, you know, the best definition I've heard was a guy named Jim Anderson. His call sign was Andy, something clever like that. But he was the guy that took me under his wing in when I joined the boat unit. He was split service, and he had this top row that was like Bronze Star, 2 awards, Legion of Merit with a V, and, you know, 3 Purple Hearts. And I'm like, yeah, my top row doesn't look like that. And I just looked at him one day and shook my head, and he just looked at me and he said, "Canfield, people are heroic when they need to be. They are normal people who are placed in abnormal situations." And I think that capacity exists inside every person. And that's one of the things we want to tell in the story here is when you look at this ship, whether you were a riveter on this ship, whether you sailed her on a midshipman cruise and just doing training, if you were on her on the 80s where we never fired a shot out of anger, if you were on her in Korea where we fired more rounds than we did in World War II, everybody who worked on this ship filled the same role. We did the job that we were here to do. And that whole title, I mean, you know, AHC, the American Heroes Channel, you're like, ugh.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know how other people feel about that. I'm always uncomfortable throwing that word around. You know, Audie Murphy was a hero. You know, the people who wear that medal on the ribbon around their neck, those are heroes, right?
Right.
BM2 Williams, who got the Medal of Honor in Vietnam on the PDRs that I went on to serve with, he's a hero to me. The rest of us, you know, we did our job. I'm proud of the job that we did. I'm not backing away from it, but I think the word's overused. So.
Well, going on.
I have one story,
Okay.
since we were talking about him being intimidating.
Oh.
The boatswain is the intimidating guy, and so I forgot who I heard it from, that they told me to ask you about the boat davit and it falling on you.
The boat falling. So,
yeah.
So you can pull that string. You got to hear about the bosun first. So the bosun Patton now was the ship's bosun. and he was the most terrifying man that I ran into on this ship. He was just terrifying. And come on, that's me on the one I'm sitting, so I have to wait for myself to finish. So Bosun Patnoud, nobody ever called him Patnoud or Bosun Patnoud. They called him Bosun, right?
Right.
And so when we first pull the ship out of mothballs, there's a bunch of veterans, a bunch being maybe 3 or 4 of us, that are riding the ship out. And we all had staterooms because we were going to spend the night on the ship on the first night, because there was a short tow and a long tow into the Richmond Inner Harbor when we started the refit. So I'm in the stateroom up forward, and across from me on the door it says Pat Patnoud, and I'm like, who the heck? The name rings a bell, but I can't put a face to it. So I'm sitting up in the wardroom with this old fart, and I hope he sees this. And so the management at the time, I wasn't involved with the institution, and they're like, hey, we want veterans to put the flags up when we moor. So we get ready to throw the lines over, and this guy looks at me and goes, all right, Canfield, grab the flag, let's go put this up. And I'm like, oh my God, he knows who I am. And so the whole time I'm walking forward, we're going to put the jack up. I'm like, I don't know who this guy is. And I'm like racking my brain. I should know him.
Right.
And all of a sudden it's like, ding, 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 ding. Oh my God, it's the bosun. Right? And he used to just scare the pee out of me. And so we put the flag up, and we ended up having a pretty good laugh about that. So the bosun, that was the same guy, right? He's the most terrifying man on the ship. And we were picking the boat up in St. Thomas, and I want to say Hugo. It was a hurricane. I want to say it was Hurricane Hugo, but it was one of them. It was a hurricane that we were running from. Okay. And so the powers that be on the ship, not that I would ever be disparaging towards senior officers, but decided it would be a great idea to leave the captain's gig and the admiral's barge in the water till the last possible moment, because, who knows, they might want to go ashore. And so by the time we started lifting the boat, it was the admiral's gig, or the admiral's barge, and it was over on the starboard side davit. The swells were high enough it felt like you could just come up and step over onto the main deck, and then there were these huge swells, and the davit comes down. It's this massive hook, and you've got to get it through this little tiny hole in the sunroof in the back cabin so that you can hook it. And the forward fall has to be hooked first because the ship is making way. And so you always hook the forward fall first because it'll tow the boat, right? Well, the forward fall doesn't even have a piece of cable on it. It's just a shackle bolted to the deck. So you got to grab this gazillion pound hook and get it through that shackle. In the meantime, I'm trying to get the loop of cable on it in the back. And so, it's crash, and all the cable comes down as the boat's riding up, and I've got to get all of my extremities extracted from it and get the thing hooked. And then you hear the bow hook, I don't have it. So then you got to get it all unhooked, and then it's gone, and then you wait for the next wave. So we did that for probably the better part of 90 minutes. And you breathe in the diesel fumes, and you're mildly seasick, and the boat's tossing, and you're hungry, and you're dehydrated, and it's just and angry. Pretty much angry, just angry. And then finally you get them hooked, and the waves pick the boat up, and then they drop it. So it's, smash, smash as they're hauling you up on the davit. Well, it's not a gentle sea, right? So the boat careens over, and it's falling. And the hook is going to catch the lip, and so I grab it, and I throw the hook, and the boat comes down on my hand, crush. Until the next wave picked it up and I could get my hand out. I didn't think anything of it. I was angry, I was cold, I was wet. So we get up and we get the boat in, and I get down and I ask the boat, and I just tell the bosun, which I would never have done in any other frame of mind. I'm like, give me a cigarette. So he hands me a cigarette, and I can't get it to light. And I look, and it's because I've done some significant damage to my hand, and that's all soaking into the cigarette, which will not then burn. So the bosun looks at me, he's like, you should go to medical. I'm like, yeah, you think? Maybe I'll go right now. So they did great surgery on it. There's a little scar and full mobility. That was all done in the operating room here.
Wow.
My wisdom teeth pulled on here too. So.
And an appendix removal here as well?
Not mine.
Not yours, but...
Yeah, they did an appendectomy on here as well.
Okay. So speaking of you not being intimidating in the slightest, honest promise this time. There was a time where you were playing music on your phone as you were walking around.
I was playing the theme song from Despicable Me. I'm having a bad day. I just started the music and stuck it in my shirt pocket. I was walking around the ship. I was having a bad day. And it was like watching waves part in front of me. People were just like, I'm not even going to ask. Which I'm like, come on, man. I mean, you guys know me. I am a nice guy. That's affirmational. I am a nice guy.
Well, want to also talk about all the nice booby traps that you make?
So when I was working at Sprint, that was where that was really. I had my office booby trapped. I had an AM and a Nerf ambush, which is the little tripwire fired Nerf gun.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I had two of them. I had one stuck so that it would fire center of mass in the doorway of my cube, and I had a little like bus pull around the cube so I could trip it from anywhere. And I had the mirror, so if people would come and wait politely so they wouldn't interrupt you and your back was to them, I'd shoot them with a little foam dart. But the other one I had pointed at the back of my own head when I was sitting at my workstation. And at night, I would push a keyboard drawer in and clip a little binder clip that was on the trip line to it. So if you sat down and pulled the keyboard out without disarming it, it would shoot you in the back of the head with a little foam. And it's a little Nerf dart, which got me a trip to HR.
Because apparently your boss
Was my boss. He was a coworker.
Yeah.
Should not have been sitting at my machine anyway.
Exactly.
But I probably would have been okay if I hadn't put a note on it so that when you turned around to see what happened, it had a little smiley face that said it could have been real. It's probably what sent me to HR. But
The HR.
And then a postal logo.
so it's also at Sprint. So Sprint was immediately following the probation and parole. So I'm like 22, right? So
Right.
less mature, maybe. maybe I'm the same now. But I had a guy with a buddy of mine in the boat unit who was a postal carrier. It was Ken Klinkers, the same guy, Headshot. And so he was a letter carrier. And so I borrowed one of his shirts because it was, 1991, 92 when going postal really meant going postal because
Right.
that's where the phrase came from.
Right.
And so I knew that Byron was going to do something stupid in the staff meeting, make some snarky comment. I was tired of him making snarky comments anyway. So I put the postal carrier shirt on, and it's baby blue, and then I put a nice little sort of cardigan over it and a tie, slacks, so I looked nice.
Mm-hmm.
But I had the postal carrier shirt on with the patches, And so, of course, at the inevitable time in the staff meeting when somebody said something, I just tore my sweater off. I'm like, that's it! I tore my sweater off. And like 3/4 of people bust up laughing, and Byron complained to HR, and I had to go to HR again. And so I went to HR, and they're like, oh, it's a hostile workplace. And today I'd just be fired.
Right.
Right.
But
Today they don't joke.
Zero tolerance.
But it was, I went to HR, and they're like, oh, it's a hostile workplace, because you showed the postal logo. And I'm like, are you listening to yourself? The postal logo makes it a hostile workplace? Well, your actions. I'm like, what? That I went, that's it? And I pulled my sweater off and that's intimidating? So they, we pushed back and forth. And so finally HR issued a policy that said that displaying the postal logo created a hostile workplace. And so then I complained to HR every time I saw the mail truck. And every time I got mail, and every time I had to buy a stamp. So the policy did not last long. It lasted about 2 weeks. The HR director and I were actually pretty good friends by the end of it.
I'm sure you two knew each other by name.
She was pretty funny. She would just look at me and go, really?
Again.
Again.
So,
So actually, going back to, I think this might have been when you were on the Iowa, and someone who was very proud of their Native American heritage wanted to create a nickname.
So that's actually my brother's.
That was
Also.
that was
on
one of your brothers.
It's on the
right?
USS Mobile. So his division officer was very proud of his Native American heritage, which he didn't have a very deep one.
Right.
And they wanted to come up with an engineering patch And so we have an engineering patch on here. You may have seen it. I helped design it. All the engineering guys did. It's a little octagonal one. It has all the ratings on it. It says USS Iowa Engineering. Well, they were trying to do something similar for the USS Mobile. So my brother recommended, so Mobile is a single screw, single shaft, single screw. So he suggested they should use the catchphrase or logo, one long continuous shaft or one single big screw. But all of those were shot down. And so one of his buddies went to the division officer and said, how about we use Bohika? It's an Indian word that means good luck, right? And so he had the design all drawn up, and it said Bohika, our screws never stop, right? Because engineering, right?
Sure.
Well, Bohika is a military acronym, which means bend over, here it comes again. So they almost had the thing produced before somebody tipped their hand, and they're like, no, sir, you actually don't want to put that on a patch. So they had him totally convinced it was a Native American word meaning good luck. So.
There was another time, I don't know if this was your brother's fun with a taxi in Korea.
Oh God, that's what my brother was with me. We were both in the boat unit, and a guy named Bob Pullen, who I ran into at the SB reunion last year. I hadn't seen him in years. Bob's like 6'4", and he's just this really tall guy. And so we pile into this cab. I don't speak Korean at all, and I don't read Hangul. I have like zero. They gave us these little cards that in Hangul and Korean it said, please help me, I'm lost, return me to the base, so that you could give them to the cab driver, and presumably they wouldn't haul you off into the hinterlands and kill you. So, which, I mean, because seriously, if you have to hand them the card, it's like, well, dude, you don't know where you are already, right? But, so we thought it would be a great idea to go shopping. So we spent like 2.5 weeks up in Phuong, up near the DMZ, doing a real pointy bullet evolution up there, aka not training, right? And then the last couple weeks we were stowing gear and doing some training and stuff down in Busan, inside the Busan perimeter, down at the base. And so it's like, oh, we're in Busan, we should go shopping, right? Well, I don't know how to get to the gate from the base to go shopping. And I don't know how to say I want to go shopping. I want to find a mall or tourist trap. So we're like, hey, if there's going to be a mall-like tourist trap, it will be near a McDonald's because that's the only place a McDonald's would be in a big city like Busan, is near some sort of international thing.
Right.
Busan is like the size of LA, right? And so we get into the cab, and the guy looks at us and goes, and we're like, McDonald's. And he cracks up laughing. And he says something in Korean, which clearly was like, which McDonald's? And we're like, yeah, McDonald's. And so he cracks up laughing, and he takes off. And it's like Mr. Toad's Wild Ride. It is the best. It is the best ride. We're in this little tiny Hyundai. And we are flying through traffic. And at one point, there's like this 5-way intersection. And the lights are like a suggestion. They're just sort of, maybe you should and maybe you shouldn't. And so he challenges this massive bus in the intersection. He's like, boom, and they're both like, and Bob's like scrunched down in the seat. He's a 6'4" guy, and he's like in the front seat, and he's scrunched down, and he reaches out and writes his initials on the bus out the window because the bus is like right there. And the whole time he goes, oh no. And the cab driver looks at him and goes, oh no! Boom! I was laughing so hard. I was laughing so I was crying. I just wanted to pay the guy to drive us around. I'm like, I don't even want to shop anymore. Just drive around, Oh, it was so funny. He's like, Korean cab driver, best driver, bus driver's crazy. It's like, we had so much fun.
I spent a week in Korea, and yes, bus drivers are crazy.
So are the cab drivers.
Oh my gosh.
The other one was, we had to use our little get out of jail card to get back to the base because we were lost.
Right.
And so the three of us we're in a special warfare unit, and I was less fat and a little more buff than I was now, or am now. And so we hand this cab driver our card, and he's like driving into this neighborhood. It's dark. There's like, we're outside of the city. All three of us are getting a little tense. And finally, he stops in like this back alley, you know, and we bail out of the car. We're like, whoop, we're out of the car. We're like, you know, it's on. Like, what's going to happen? And he motions another cab over. He was as lost as we were. We'll end up piling into the other cab, and they take us back to the base. It was like, yeah, that was a little unnerving because it's like, really? So,
Hope the guy got himself home.
yeah, really. So,
I know that there are some stories you can't tell us. The one about calling down fire, I don't think you can.
no, that's not one we share in public company.
So,
Did you have a hard out at 3 o'clock?
I do have a hard out at 3 o'clock. I have
just at 3.
yeah. So the Fleet Week security planning meeting, it just started at the port building,
Oh.
which is about a 10-minute walk from here. So
okay, so we might want
That's
to.
probably an important one.
we should probably wrap up.
All right. Well, thanks for being here,
Well,
David.
thank you for being here. And
I would love to stay here and
Yeah.
chat. It's a lot more
We'll have
fun
to have
than
you.
going to a
Drag you
security
back
meeting.
here.
But
Yeah.
yeah,
I
absolutely.
mean, as we or as I was kind of saying before you arrived, when we first started this, you were the person that we knew we would have to get you on for all of your stories,
or some subset thereof.
or some subset thereof of the Iowa, of Nav Spec War, of everything in between, and all the various booby traps you sent. And I'm sure that there are more booby trap stories that you have.
Probably.
Probably. Well, let me just ask this: are there any set on the ship now? Or can
Booby
you,
traps, not stories.
can you not?
No. So I know Nate booby trapped his stateroom because I had to defeat it when I opened his stateroom so we could change the LED lights. He hadn't been on the ship in forever. No, I don't think so. I'm a little tamer now. Now I'm using cameras. So, you know, there are a lot of cameras on the ship though.
So it is indeed safe to walk on the ship,
As far as I know. As far as you know.
which are not necessarily the same thing.
Well, now we need to get you involved in the escape room. setting booby
Absolutely.
traps.
Absolutely.
Oh God.
So, all right, guys. Thanks so
All right,
much. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much
All right.
for coming.
We'll see you.
All right.